you. So I just want to say how wonderful it is to feel supported in doing this. Everybody that helped spread the word. There's something about spring being here and its full flower that feels very supportive. The full moon that's coming. Even the pandemic supports this in its own kind of backhanded way by giving us such a strong call to wake up to our predicament and new ways of seeing and being together. And I wanted to also say a little bit about the origins of this series. So about 16 years ago, I left my career as a professional activist, just shy of burning out. So I still had some energy and some inspiration to really look at root causes of our predicament, our environmental insanity, the violence in the world. And that led me to a whole bunch of different things. It led me to restorative justice, led me to a lot of different trainings and a lot of different mentors. And I put everything I learned into this work I call Active Peace. And it's a pretty full package. And I have to say that the best way that I know of to put all of that into practice is through this Active Peace Circle process. And I have been very inspired to find groups of people that wanted to put it on the ground, that wanted to put it into practice. So when I recently joined the local NAACP branch, and I heard people talking about paradigm change, and I felt the good energy there, I thought, here's some people that could put this into practice. So we started a Healing Justice working group, and we've had a few meetings now. And one of the first things we discovered was that we really needed some shared understanding about what healing justice is. What's the process? What would it look like? What are the principles? What are the practices? So I offered to do this webinar as a way to get us on the same page. And there was also support from new friends I have with Transition US, people doing the important work of relocalizing our economies. And they said, we need this. And there's also the Shambhala connection, where there also seems to be a need for healing justice. So that's a little bit about the origins. And just to say, it's wonderful to see you all. If you, with your video images, if you are going to be doing something that might be distracting to others, if you could maybe turn your video off, that would be great. If you could stay muted unless you're planning to speak, that would also be super supportive. And questions, I want to address that. I really welcome thoughtful questions as a way to deepen into the material, to make it real for all of us. And there will be moments in each of the sessions, towards the middle and towards the end, for questions. There's also the Google document, which I envision will be our primary way to get questions asked and answered, having everybody pitch in, where we don't have the same kind of time constraints as we do in these video sessions. And I'm not going to be using the chat function. So please don't send me any chats because I'm not going to look at them. For my purposes, and I think our purposes, it would just be more distracting than anything else. So that is a little bit on the question. So obviously, if you have something that feels burning, unmute yourself and just say, Scott, I have a question. But I'd really rather you try to hold it if you can until there's a time for that in the session.
Scott, I have a process question, and that is, how long is each webinar going to last?
They're at least an hour and 15 minutes, up to an hour and a half.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best to, we won't go longer than an hour and a half. I promised in the promotional materials an hour and 15, and as you can probably appreciate, that's really challenging, but I'm going to do my best with that. And I think we'll be on track with that for this session. So with that, I just want to invite us to drop in, to settle in as we really prepare to roll up our sleeves in this session. Letting your breath support you in making the transition from your day to being here. Letting your breath support you and letting the thoughts go. Connecting with your body. Fully inhabiting the spot where you are, the chair, the couch, whatever it might be. And I want to invite you to tune into the longing that brings you to these sessions. What is it that brings you here? Just let yourself be curious about that. See if you can feel that as a longing that's very heart-centered. And honor it. Honor that longing as life energy, as an expression to your connection to all of life and all beings. All the suffering, all the beauty. And let your connection to that longing really help anchor you throughout these sessions. Help you be as present as possible, as connected to your heart as possible. So, thank you for that. I've opened up the PowerPoint presentation that I have, and we're going to dive into that. I want to say something about the image which is the eternal flame from the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site. It's a photo I took a few years back when I was there on the book tour, and I've just always enjoyed that imagery and where it's from and just everything that it kind of evokes for me, and I find it relevant to what we're doing here today. So you've seen the session outline in the promotional materials. So all I really want to say here is that starting in week 3, we will start working with some scenarios to help us deepen into the material. And every week, every session really represents a deepening. So we're really going to be building as we go. And in this first session, the Restorative Justice Worldview, we are really just starting to build a foundation that we'll continue to deepen into throughout the sessions. And some overall aspirations that I hold for this, that you understand the basic principles and practices of active peace circles and appreciate their transformational potential. That you take away some foundations and the inspiration to form and be a part of a group that will actually put this into practice. That you deepen your personal capacity to show up in any situation, any relationship with more clarity, courage, commitment, and compassion. And I believe the foundations I'll be presenting will support you in that. And that you bring forward the capacities you already have, because they are abundant and far greater than anything I'm going to be able to offer in 5 short sessions. So I guess I'm hoping for kind of an integration, that you bring forward what you have and any inspiration that you can draw from these sessions to show up in a way that really aligns with healing justice. And that you embrace love perhaps more than you already do as the transformational energy that creates change. Love, it turns out, will be one of our major themes. That you feel perhaps more heart-centered than you already do, more comfortable leading with your heart, even in the challenging, not so touchy-feely territory of activism and social change. I'm going to pepper in some inspiring quotes, which I just fast forwarded through. The quote from Victor Hugo: "There is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come," is what that quote says. And I feel that healing justice and active peace circles is an idea whose time has come. And the way we're going to start our exploration of the restorative justice worldview is by looking at what it isn't. It isn't the belief in separateness. And by that, I mean the belief that we as humans are separate from each other, from other species and the earth, and from our spiritual essence. The belief in separateness has been handed down for generations, and it really is pivotal in the dominant paradigm, the dominant worldview. As I explored that for quite a while and continue to explore that, I really feel like the dominant worldview is really about separateness, the belief in it, the illusion that we're separate from each other and from spirit and from the earth. and that all the systems we're embedded in, political, economic, etc., arise from our collective beliefs about ourselves and the world. And that the belief in separateness underpins white supremacy and patriarchy, that every issue is a symptom of it, that it's the root cause of virtually every kind of violence, that fundamentalism lives here, that understanding the belief in separateness as root cause helps us understand why things are the way they are. There's a reason for the insanity out there, and that there's no quick fix to healing the belief in separateness. So I feel it's important to start here because I think it's our failure to really grapple with the depth of this wound that has limited our evolution and our progress. There's a way that we can do a kind of spiritual bypass of this and just talk about oneness and jump to oneness without doing the really conscious hard work of healing the belief in separateness. Not necessarily hard work, but repetitive, because it's deep in us. So I want to just invite you to reflect on just this much. Couple of questions. How does the belief in separateness show up in your life, your relationships? Just reflecting to yourself. To what extent is separateness your default, your autopilot? I'm certainly well aware how it is my default and my autopilot. And I think there's something important about grappling with questions like this that really invite radical honesty. And that's also going to be one of our themes, this ability to be very honest with ourselves and ultimately each other. So the remedy for the belief in separateness is a worldview that's rooted, grounded, orbits around the truth of our interrelatedness, interbeing. And I want to say before we go any deeper that I don't think there's any one definitive definition. I certainly don't have it. What I'm hoping to do in this presentation is just try to speak from my heart to yours about how this restorative justice worldview, this interconnected worldview lives in me, and hopefully that can speak to you. So how will it live in you is really the question. No right way on that. So just some of the characteristics as I feel them, that the restorative, whereas the dominant paradigm, the belief in separateness, is very ego-centric, very personal. Here's a worldview that's very transpersonal, that's beyond the personal, that aligns us with our true nature and the mystery and fullness of being, the truth of interrelatedness and reciprocity, a worldview that is life-affirming, that is healing and holistic, and sane. A worldview that's characterized by maturity, psychological maturity, ecological maturity, relational maturity, spiritual maturity. And I want to say early on that there's no getting around the spiritual dimensions of healing justice and active peace circles and a restorative justice worldview. It's where maturity leads. And it's what allows us to feel deeply and be more heart-centered and see more clearly how we are interrelated. That separateness has always been an illusion. To see the big picture and to hold paradox. The mystery that we're embedded in. The fact that we're not in control. To see the beauty and the devastation and be able to hold it all. That requires maturity. So this is our territory. And spiritual maturity has always been the foundation of the courage needed for nonviolence. We think about Gandhi and the civil rights movement, the freedom riders, all of the people who have been martyred for justice, for their beliefs in God. So many martyrs. And the courage it took to do that was not an ego-centered courage. It was a deep courage rooted in maturity. And I want to make the link here between healing justice and active peace circles and nonviolence. And it'll help us to think of an active peace circle as a kind of nonviolent campaign. If we're talking about something big, which I often think big when I think about active peace circles, the BP oil spill, police violence, people of color being killed by police, sexual abuse. I think of big things that require a lot of preparation, a lot of dedication to see it through. And all of the effort and internal preparation that's always characterized deep nonviolence, including the sometimes seemingly impossible work of getting people to the table, in our case, the circle, when they're initially resistant, and all the challenges associated with staying connected and respectful and consistently nonviolent in the face of that resistance. So everything that nonviolence has always entailed, I think, is alive here in this territory of healing justice and active peace circles. And that's why we need to be embedded in this worldview that takes us out of our normal, habitual modes of operating. And I want to say really briefly here that an active peace circle is a form of truth and reconciliation, that both of these are forms of healing justice. And a lot of people point to things like the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa, in Rwanda, as something that we need here to deal with reparations And I say yes. And we have our own homegrown version of that in restorative justice and what we're unpacking here in healing justice. And that an active peace circle, like deep nonviolence, is ultimately about love. Gandhi understood it as about love. Martin Luther King Jr. understood it as about love. That love, in the end, was always what nonviolence was ultimately about. And one of the resources I will send you after our session tonight is a really wonderful page from the King Center, which talks about the King's principles of nonviolence. And there's a nice write-up on the beloved community. And we're gonna talk more about the beloved community in a future session. But I just want to make that point that I think in our unpacking of nonviolence, one of the things I will say probably more than once is just the way that we have tended to really narrow what nonviolence is and not appreciate the depth of it as it was practiced by people like the Freedom Riders, where it really was clearly about love, and that deeper courage was really being called forth. So love is one of our primary themes, maybe not something you were expecting. And what can we really say about love? Well, we could say a lot, but for our purposes, I want to just evoke this definition, or this energy, that love is not a feeling, but the very energy that creates the world and all of life and you and me and all the people we don't agree with, the energy that creates everything. I think this is pivotal in the restorative justice worldview, and pivotal to doing the work that we're preparing ourselves to do. It turns out that even the quantum physicists, people like Brian Swim, the cosmologist, are coming to the conclusion that love is really the best descriptor of what brings the world into being. They use words like allurement and strange attractors, entanglement, but it really seems to boil down to love, we can say. So it's not so much about trusting that love will prevail, but trusting that love is already having its way, regardless of appearances and our preferences and our time frames. So throughout the sessions, I'm going to be underscoring certain foundations and essentials, just the ones that really jump out in the sessions, some of the ones that may be a little less obvious. Ones like this, that love is the energy that creates the world. Tuning into your deep longing, as we did in that opening meditation. That we will find is another foundation that really connects us to our hearts and can help us hold the restorative healing space that we want to be holding. Presence. All of these qualities, these capacities, take a lot of presence, a lot of consciousness, a lot of mindfulness. And radical honesty will be one of our foundations. So just that is already kind of a lot. So I just want to invite you to take some conscious breaths, reconnect with your body. And I'd like to go ahead and take some questions here if there are any. Anything flowing from what's been shared so far.
And my question is to ask how the 5 Rs flow and dance with what you've shared.
Great. We are going to dance with the 5 Rs very shortly. Yeah. Thanks, Bonnie. Any other
question? Yeah, I have a question. Yeah. So if you say that love is the energy that creates the world and brings about change, if a peace circle is in a situation where harm has been done, and that, you know, going through all the stages to restore the situation, how does love fit into that process?
I see it as the space that facilitators hold, that people like us hold who've had trainings like this, who want to make circles like that happen. It's not a principle that is an obvious part of an active peace circle or restorative justice. That's probably asking a little too much of people, but it's pivotal to this restorative justice worldview. I think this is a really great question, Anne.
And I just like a part 2 of that, and that is, if I'm in a circle with someone who has harmed me, then it seems to me that the way to heal is for the process to uncover this person's love for herself. Because if you don't, I feel like a lot of violence is done when people don't love themselves.
Right.
So I'm sure there'll be more of that as we go on. But it
well,
just seems like
there will be, and the 5 Rs are really one of the things that will anchor us in that energy. And you know, this would seem, I'm feeling like this would be a great question for the very end of our sessions, to say, okay, you know, now we kind of know the nuts and bolts, and you started talking about love, and that sort of didn't factor in as a nut or a bolt. Where is it, you know? And I think we will find that it's in the space, that it's unavoidable. It doesn't have to be named, but it's alive, and it's ultimately what brings us together in the first place, and inspires us and makes our hearts beat, and you know, all of that.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you,
Scott. I'm really enjoying this presentation, but I have this sort of question, and that is, I don't think that interrelatedness is enough, because I think there's a deeper level to our interrelatedness, which is our basic nature. That it's, you know, like I can't call it human nature because that would leave other beings out of it. You know, our natural nature, I don't know what to call it, but the nature of life we all share. In my tradition, we would call basic goodness, you know, like, so that has to come out come into the dialogue in terms of the worldview. And that is, I'm not only interrelated with all these beings and nature, because I'm really a Gaia believer. So it's like we all share the same thing. We're not just interrelated. We are the same thing. Don't you think?
I do. And people who know me know that I love the word interbeing as something that really captures that that goes deeper than interrelatedness, I think, to being itself. And that's the territory we're in. And thank you for helping us deepen into that. No argument here. No
pleasure.
argument here.
Pleasure.
That is our territory.
I have a thought along those lines. Just thinking about love, one of the things that has been revealed to me is that love is bearing another person's pain. And when you think about that in terms of the peace circle or restorative justice, or even what Sheriff just said about, that it's deeper than interrelatedness, it's that love that we can have even for our enemies, like you mentioned, that's the energy that creates the world. But so in the idea of bearing another person's pain, like in a place like a peace circle where we want justice for the victim in a way that is, helpful and soothing, and not just the criminal justice style, but also for the offender. Like Anne mentioned, like them learning how to love themselves is part of that, and they can't do that without feeling love from someone else. So I just think, being able to bear their pain, whoever it is, I just think that all fits together.
Love that. Yeah, we're going to talk more. This will come out more in our sessions. There'll be a whole little section on basic goodness, basic dignity, when we do our section on deep nonviolence. So thank you for that wonderful input, everybody.
Is there time for one more?
One more. Let's do one more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think, as you are aware, there's at least 20 people on here, and probably more, who are from or within or some part of the Shambhala community, which, as I think has been devastated in the past few years. And so, I currently am the director of the Boulder Shambhala Center, and I just stepped into this role the end of February. COVID hit. At any rate, so we're all pretty sure of our view and belief in basic goodness and the ultimate nature of the universe and all things. We got that, and yet we're right and you're wrong about what should happen in Shambhala now. And so this is not a victim and offender. This is a community, a traumatized community, as you are aware, with vastly different, profound sureness in their beliefs about what's wrong and what needs to happen. And this is within the thought of, yes, you're basically good and you are me, but you're wrong, So I just want to sort of name that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of tired at this time of day after many Zoom meetings, so I'm not sure if what I said was perfectly clear. I could have said it more concisely and clearly. But when people do really hold and that belief system and practice it but are so sure of their viewpoint, to the point of great hostility with one another.
Yeah.
I just want to name that.
Thank you for that. My short response to that is trust this process. Yeah. What we say in restorative justice is we trust the wisdom of the circle. And I think there will be an unfolding through the course of these sessions that is very heart-centered. And if we think about one of the very core aspects of restorative justice and an active peace circle, and that is the willingness to hear the full extent of the harm.
Yeah.
Just that much changes the dynamic, changes
I believe in
people.
that. Yeah.
So no, I'm gonna kind of have to insist on taking us back now. Thank you though.
Yep.
Let's see, here we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I'm really thrilled by those questions and comments and the deepening that comes through that. So we're going to do a quick, I'm going to do a quick time check. I think we're still in pretty good shape. Some restorative justice basics. And hopefully you've already, you already have these. I know there are people participating in the webinar who are very active in restorative justice, the Boulder County Sheriff's Office program, the Loveland, Colorado program, probably others. So restorative justice as an aspect of the criminal justice system, where crime is seen as a violation of people and relationships, where those violations create obligations, and where the central obligation is to repair the harm in the best way possible. And where it's not about blame and punishment. So it brings victims, offenders, and the community together. Everyone gets a voice, looks each other in the eye. The focus is on accountability and repairing harm. And again, this is worth repeating, not about blame and punishment. And so I want to just pause here and just compare and contrast this with what we know about the, call it the mainstream criminal justice system, the punitive model. Here's a restorative model that we can contrast with the punitive model and just get a sense for how different it is, how it's a different worldview, right? A worldview where even the offenders, the people who cause the harm, get a voice, get to participate in what the repair is going to be, where the community is invited in, where victims get to actually hear why this happened. You know, what was going on for you? Why me? All these questions that victims often don't get answered. So a very different worldview, a very different energy. Basic goodness, absolutely. Everyone worth more than their worst mistake. And the 5 Rs of restorative justice are really where it gets practical. Another response to Jessie that came up when she was speaking is yes, we have to get beyond the platitudes and make serious commitments to doing the work and to being restorative. So these 5 Rs we're going to unpack in depth in our next session. So here I mostly just want to, again, hold it up and say, compare this to what we see out in the world. Our leaders, so-called. Where it's so not about respect. It's so not about responsibility. So not about relationship. And not about repair. And just this shift from blame and shame and punishment to a commitment to repair harm. So in a community that's wounded, that needs to heal, just orbiting around this one R. We're gonna repair this harm in the best way we can. That's our priority. It's not about being right. It's not about being righteous. And then that fifth R of reintegration, I'll say a little more about too, because that one can be a little less obvious, but it's our litmus test. If we've done the work to repair the harm, we simply ask people, has the harm been fully repaired? Can everyone reintegrate back into the community without lingering blame, shame, and resentment? If the answer is yes, then we've got reintegration and we've done a fine job with our restorative process. If people are not ready to reintegrate without blame, shame, and resentment, then we haven't fully repaired the harm. There's more to do. So we would simply ask the circle, what more needs to be done? How can we get all the way to reintegration? So more in the next session, and these will come up in every session. So please, frame it, print it out, put it on your fridge, tattoo these R's on your chest. I don't care, but this is really pivotal to healing justice and what we are doing together here. So I'm going to make a quick transition to active peace circles, which in so many ways, every way that is meaningful, take the best of restorative justice and yet go deeper. So they take the 5 R's. Active peace circles are rooted in deep nonviolence, in love and collective action. So again, like a nonviolent campaign to get justice. They're community initiated, community led. They're not system initiated and system led. Can be applied to the full range of challenging issues. They change hearts and minds. And you've already seen this list of issues where they can be applied. And this was really my way of saying that active peace circles can address harm and accountability related to any issue you can think of. I don't think there's any real limits. But there are requirements. What are those requirements? Well, there has to be a willingness to take some initial responsibility. And I say initial responsibility because full responsibility can only be taken when we fully understand the harm. And that will only come through the circle process, through everybody speaking to the harm from their perspective. Once the harm is fully unpacked, then we can ask for full responsibility. But in the beginning, we're willing to just settle for initial responsibility and a show of good faith, a willingness to share and hear the full extent of the harm, willingness to listen deeply, sincere willingness to repair the harm, the ability to be respectful, and the ability to stay consistent in all of the above. So that's kind of a high bar, right? So that's where the preparation comes in. And that's where the spiritual dimensions come in for those of us that are actually trying to make this happen. We have to be coming from a deep place of trust and care. And this is why healing justice and active peace circles catalyze our evolution as a species. And why it's a beautiful response to these dark times and what's really needed now. So in the book, I hope you had a chance to look at that chapter excerpt. I really unpack this a lot in looking at using the BP oil spill as an example. And I wanted to take something extreme just as a way to really work the principles and all the questions that flow from the principles. And at the time the book came out, it was 6 years since the oil spill. And I asked the question, has the harm been fully repaired? And the answer was clearly no. And now it's 10 years later. There was just the anniversary, so it was in the news again. And the cancers in humans are just now starting to show up. People who worked on the cleanup, people who lived nearby. So tremendous harm that will probably never be repaired. And I could have just as easily have used Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, some other tragic situation, sexual abuse, to apply these principles, because they can be applied in the same way to any issue. So I just want to ask the question, how common is it that something horrific happens and the harm never gets repaired, that the full extent of the harm is never even revealed and understood because people haven't come together in that atmosphere of respect to really be able to share it and hear it? And what are the implications of that for individuals, families, communities, and societies? So we're going to go into a breakout group now. And as you probably know, I have the ability to put you in breakout groups automatically, and we will work in groups of 3. And 1 or 2 of you may end up not being a part of a triad, and I'll work with you. So you'll have 10 minutes, 1 minute to say hello, introduce yourselves, and 3 minutes each to answer a simple question. So assuming that most everything presented this evening, the 5 Rs, love as the energy that creates change, the truth-telling we talked about, the presence required we talked about, all are aspects of the restorative justice worldview. What is the restorative justice worldview evoking in you right now? Just what's alive for you around this right now? No right answer, no wrong answer. So what is the restorative justice worldview evoking for you right now? And I am going to go ahead and pause the recording. And after the groups, we will go back to record. And let's just roll with this as a large group. I'll just invite you to take a moment, and I can then now go back and okay.
One of the things that comes up for me when I think of this opportunity is just taking the leaps of faith that seems to be required that this can actually happen. You know, the leap of faith that beloved community can actually exist. I know I want it to exist. I want it to exist in myself. I want to be fully loving and caring and selfless and everything. And yet sometimes I find myself stopping it, fully committing to the vision that it's really possible. And at times getting discouraged when I watch too much news that seems to yell out that it's not possible. So again, just taking the leap of faith having the vision that all of this is possible is one of my challenges.
Thank you. It sounds like a challenge and an intention too. You know, something that supports you at the same time. Thank you. Others?
What it evokes is that the principles are fantastic, nothing wrong with this, but it's actually, it requires a systems approach in which, for example, you know, I worked in the Democratic Republic of Congo when there were child soldiers who had been forced into militias to do atrocious acts, and they had to be pardoned and reintegrated in the community. I worked in Rwanda, where they had the circles, you know, to hear how the community would heal. It has to have, in those cases, I'm not saying here in this country, but it has to have, people coming to the circle have to have a very strong sense of community, which in Africa is alive and well, by the way, but also some kind of higher authority that sort of guides the process from the back seat. You know? Doesn't guide it from the front. It's like no backseat driver, but allows for the repair and the reintegration to happen. Do you see what I'm meaning here? Where I'm going with this?
Absolutely.
So you did not bring those things up. So I thought from my own experience in working in those situations that those are necessary elements to the process.
Yeah. Well, when you said from the back seat, where I went with that was that's what invoking this restorative justice worldview does, and these qualities that I feel like have been evoked tonight. Community is one of the ways we're handicapped in this culture, but the circle itself builds community.
Very much so.
And so, yeah, I honor your experience in those contexts. Yeah, so I think it's all, I think all of this, and again, we're going to deepen as we go. This is only our first session.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks.
Well, good. So I'm seeing some things in the chat. I'm going to have just a quick look. Yeah, good stuff there. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, let's take one more, and then I'm just watching the time. We're gonna have to move on. So Nikki, please.
So what this evokes in me is the multiple levels of where it can be applied, from family relations. I used to work at the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program, and my kids, whenever they were having a conflict, they'd look and say, "Are you warping me?" So it comes down from a very family unit to, as you were saying, that big global, the ExxonMobil, it can be applied at so many levels in interpersonal relations and international relations.
I love that. Thank you. Yes, 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 yes. If we'd had the breakout groups, my intention was to have some group time for reflection and hear your voices, and we just did that. So we're going to move forward towards our close. So again, I'm going to be highlighting some foundations, some essentials. So really, really feel into these. How much is here? How much we're already putting in the circle, in our hearts and in our healing justice context. And I will be sending some additional resources. I mentioned the King Center page. I've got a wonderful article from my good friend Deborah, who's on with us tonight, about the coronavirus. It was in the New Yorker. The coronavirus is rewriting our imaginations. I will send a link to that. And I include it because it feels very relevant to this theme of worldview and feelings and how feeling things fully is another way that we're handicapped in this culture. And one of the ways we're called to grow and evolve. And so that comes out in this piece, which is a nice way to weave the pandemic in with what we're doing here together. The Restorative Justice Colorado website is a good resource for anybody who just wants information on restorative justice in the criminal justice system, sort of the mainstream restorative justice. It's a good resource for that. And then some books that are also good resources. We didn't talk about the indigenous roots of restorative justice tonight, but one of my favorite books on restorative justice is Returning to the Teachings by a Canadian that really brings that out, the indigenous roots. So this will be in an email. It will also be in the Google Doc. I'll keep a running list of resources in the Google Doc. And I want to offer some gratitude to Christopher and Luann Hormel for funding that really made it possible for me to put these sessions together and to offer them for free. So much gratitude to them for believing in me and Active Peace. Here's another quote that I like. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. The words of Jesus as per the Gospel of Thomas. And the way I feel this tonight is that the what here is the fullness of our hearts. And the restorative justice worldview and the healing that wants to happen, personal and collective. So much is being called forth now, beyond the personal. And I feel like it's not bringing that forth that has limited previous generations, us, and it just doesn't have to keep limiting us. It's time to bring it forth. So thank you for being here tonight. I look forward to our next session. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen and unmute everybody so that we can say good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
So much.
I'll send the
everyone.
I'll send the link to the recording, and I recommend the review.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Put your questions in the Google Doc, please.
Good night.
Let's really dig in there.
Okay. Good
Thank
night.
you all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Night.
Thank you.